It's connecting. Welcome everybody to the Catholic Schools Guide inaugural virtual forum nationally being broadcast across Australia. We are joined by an exclusive panel, which you can see on your screen here. Maureen Ryan, welcome. Patrick Kelly, Susie McAvale, Brett Entwistle and Anthony Campitelli have all joined us on this star-studded panel that's been put together. And some things can happen quite quickly. So welcome everywhere from where you're listening, and delegates are joining us as I speak. And of course, there'll be plenty of opportunities to ask questions and interact. We are recording the panel. We do hope that you'll stay on for the full 2.25 hours because we want to give respect to everyone who's giving up their time voluntarily to be here today. I'm going to just share my screen for a moment, and I will, hopefully this will work all nicely, and Anthony or Brad or someone will give me a little heads up that this is all okay. How are we sharing? Does it look good?
That's great, Greg. Yep.
Fantastic. So it is the virtual forum. And one of the themes is embracing innovative thinking to market your school in the post-COVID world is the theme for today's event. So about today, I founded Catholic Schools Guide in 2010. I've been working for 37 years in the education and not-for-profit sector. So in that time, I've been a teacher, a year-level coordinator, director of marketing, sat on several boards and committees from boards, founded the Catholic Schools Guide in 2010. And how today happened? Well, today happened about 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago. I was sitting around and thought, gee, it'd be good to do something to help schools. What could we do? So I think I picked up the phone to Maureen and said, Maureen, how about we do a national forum for all schools across Australia? And of course, Maureen, being one of the great principals and visionary thinkers, said, that's a great idea and I'm happy to help. And the same response was from Patrick, Susie and Brad and Anthony. And really, it literally was not a great big planned event. It was just because we wanted to do something transformational, something that speaks to the philosophy of Catholic Schools Guide, that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. In terms of housekeeping, you can ask questions anytime you like. We'd encourage you to use that chat feature. I'll try to monitor the questions. We do have a Q&A session at the end. So I'm predominantly going to lead it to the Q&A. Each speaker will be on for about 20 minutes each, thereabouts, and we will just keep rolling through. So there are our speakers. Maureen Ryan from King Coppell Rose Bay in New South Wales. Brad Entwistle from Image 7, one of Australia's national providers. Anthony Campitelli, based in the United States, co-founder and CEO of Inquiry Tracker. Susie McAvale at Salesian College, Chadstone in Victoria. Patrick Kelly from Blackfriars Priory School in South Australia. And Patrick, many of you will know, is a former national president of Educate Plus and has been a great servant of collegiate and professional development. We will end with a Q&A panel. We will be joined on the Q&A panel by internet marketing coach Cameron Bailey, who also works and assists Catholic Schools Guide in its efforts. Catholic Schools Guide today is a free event. There's no payments to any speakers, to any delegates, no charges. But of course, Catholic Schools Guide is very proud of its relationships with our corporate supporters who are not paying for this event. It's just something that we want to say thanks to them to help keep the costs of CSG down. Inquiry Tracker, Vex Robotics, which is a fantastic program that I really, really encourage you all to look out and have a look. Vex Robotics, Google that one. Australian Catholic Superannuation Retirement Fund are our big three partners. We're also proudly got great support relationships with Mountain Shade. So if you need marquees or flags for your school, that's where you get them from. Lemonade Stand, I'd really urge you to check this one out. This is very, very interesting for kids and adults alike. Go and Google Lemonade Stand and see what you get. It's going to be a really interesting result. Financial Planning, Nexia Australia. MacKillop Family Services, most of you will know what MacKillop Family Services is doing in the welfare space. Catholic Schools Guide is printed by Elecon Fine Printers. And if you need any printing done, Elecon is the place to go. Australian Catholics, great relationship with Aussie Catholics, and they've just really launched this extraordinary new resource initiative to help RE educators across Australia at all RE schools, Catholic schools. So you might want to dip in and find John Hammond and chat to him about these resources there. Light FM, Christian radio station with a big reach across Melbourne, about 1 million every month and growing. Their audience, and great partners with Catholic Schools Guide. And just a quick word about the guide without labouring the point too much. Founded in 2010, very proudly. This year was our 10th edition, probably my most proudest moment, because it was about celebrating Australia's first peoples. And that was the cover, so beautifully designed by a girl from, a young woman, Indigenous woman from Sydney in Year 12, and that's her artwork. And isn't that just stunning? The print edition, we have 100,000 copies over 3 editions. It reaches 2,500 destinations. It's free to the end user. There's a 12 months lifespan, and it's delivered straight into the hands of our target audience. And obviously, if you're a Catholic school in Melbourne, Brisbane, or Sydney, if you're located in the greater metropolitan area, you can be part of that guide. But obviously, there's lots of schools that have joined us from around Australia who can be part of our digital presence. In terms of the sorts of numbers that we get, you can read the numbers on the screen. 5.2 million Google searches last year. Great analytics, unlimited tour and event promotion. And there's a really, really great offer. If you stay on board to the end, I've got some fantastic offers on the table for all schools that are giving my staff apoplexy at the moment. But anyway, it's not about the staff, it's about helping Catholic Ed. So hopefully you will join us in this journey of being a Catholic Schools Guide partner. I'll show you, that's actually what a featured page looks like on our website. It's obviously a condensed version of it. And I'll show you this a little bit later in the piece of what that would look like if you were to take a full page featured listing on our website. And again, I want to now move into embracing our innovative thinking in your school. And I'm now going to hand over to our first very gifted speaker, Maureen Ryan, and I will stop sharing my screen, Maureen, and hand the conch to you. Mm-hmm. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Greg.
My pleasure. I'll let you get your computer ready. And yes, Maureen, we can see your screen.
Okay, fantastic. Well, welcome all. And it is great to be here. When Greg did contact me a couple of weeks ago and I said yes, and yes very quickly, I then wondered what on earth I'd said yes to, because, it's an individual story, marketing. And I think that if you look at the topic of how to market your school post-COVID-19, I really want us to spend the next 15 to 20 minutes or so really asking the question, how well do you know your characters? And you need to look at a compelling plot. So use that as your frame. I certainly don't have all the answers, but this is our story. And I hope it might be helpful to you in some way. As you can see there, the title is What Did You See? And that we'll come back to that quite a bit along the way. So comes in 3 parts, this presentation. The first is a backward glance. Take yourself back to term 1, 2020. It is only 6 months ago, although it seems about like a couple of years ago. We began, didn't we, with that new hype, a new year, a new decade, a new beginning, a new you. And that all changed fairly quickly with the bushfires, for some of us flood, and then COVID-19. And I would have to say in that space, and I'll come back to this, but leading a day and a boarding school currently with families who had been impacted by drought, bushfire, flood, and now COVID, it's been a fairly challenging time to lead. But equally, it has been probably the most rewarding time to lead, and it's been an absolute privilege to do so. So as we look to the future, and with a future focus about how we market a school post-COVID-19, I think first of all, it's important to look back and analyse your story, your journey during the pandemic itself. And I want you to think about what drove your marketing and your communication during, say, late March and during April in particular, because that comes a key part of the story. So what did your community see in your messaging? What did they hear and what did they feel as you led your community? And how do you know? So there is one thing to send out publications and communications. You had an idea of what you wanted to put out there, but how do you know it hit the mark? So now we are coming into a holiday period. It might be beneficial just to take a moment to look back. We had 3 key messages and all were aspirational, and there could be a whole new webinar on how well we did this. So let's park that idea. But all we wanted to do was to have 3 key messages to anchor all of our communication. And they were to provide the best possible teaching and learning on a remote platform, to provide the best care possible on a remote platform, and to be better and stronger as a community post-COVID. And that final one, I think, was really important in delivering all of our correspondence that went out to the community. So if I go back to that question of what did the community see, it is my hope that they saw a level of confidence and a sense of calm. I certainly wasn't calm. I don't think anyone was, but it's irrelevant what I was. The community thought that I was calm. So God only knows how I achieved that. The other C words there during those initial days were connect with your community. So have a think about what your key messages would have been during that time. At all times when things are changing around us, as we did with COVID-19, I think communities needed to be an anchor of hope. So there's a picture there of Kincoppal Rose Bay up there on the hill. And we sent a number of videos back to the community from that very position, not on the boat, but on the sand there, to say, you know, you're not here and we're missing you, but, you know, we are your anchor of hope and we will be there for you. So a question there about however your community heard your messages during that time will continue to shape how the community and your competitors know of and speak about the way that you responded to COVID-19 from the beginning, now and into the future. And I'm going to come back to your competitors because that's a real space. Part 2. So we travel very quickly through this bit. We've gone back to the beginning and we said, okay, what did you see during those initial stages? Now we're in our present reality. We're now June 2020. And depending on what state we're in, we're transitioning out of that pandemic stage and moving into a new normal. That photo was actually taken during COVID-19, but one early morning. But I think it is a good frame of reference here to sort of say, here is a new beginning. We are now transitioning into a new normal with that rainbow of thinking there about what is, in my case, KRB, in your case, what will your school look like into the future? So now I think we move from confident and calm to confident and collaborative. You're needing to speak with a range of your stakeholders to really think about, focus deeply on your community and where you think that your next buy-in, your next big thing will come as you transition through this phase. So it's time to really drill down and to look at opportunities post-COVID. And I'm going to really stress here, we should not just fall back into old patterns. Once again, this involves an individual analysis for each school to make based on what your strengths are, and you build upon your innate strengths. So this is our part 3 now. We've got a future focus. And what I'm saying here is, you know, no matter how old your school is, you've got the historic view of KRB far left, present view now, and then this light bulb moment about how on earth are we going to position our community in a different way. So with that future focus, I think we move from confident and collaborate to confident and courageous, and reposition your community into the future. with always a sense that your values, your ethos, your charism, your mission will always remain constant from the left of your screen to the right, but your school needs to change dramatically as we reposition our community. So in all of that, we need to be absolutely aspirational in our hopes for the future. Have a think about your mission, your charism, your ethos, your culture. Ask yourself, where did you see and hear your mission in your messaging? How and in what ways did you ensure that your school survived COVID during those months of probably March, April, May? And then drill down further and ask the question, how did your school ensure that it survived either as a Sacred Heart school, a Mercy school, a Jesuit school, a Salesian school, Dominican school? Pick your charism and say, how did that change? Because that's part of your repositioning out as well. Think about your community. How and in what ways are you going to connect with current, past, prospective families in a very different way, particularly, as far as I know here anyway, where our parents are not on site. I can't speak for other states, but if that's the case, it's a new challenge for us to connect in different ways. How can your learning grow on that remote platform and perhaps into global opportunities? Think laterally, broadly, boldly. Sustainability. This one's a key one because your parents' lives, some of them have changed dramatically. So therefore the whole notion of finances, debtors, your current and your prospective families, and I'm going to come back to that because that's information a principal really needs in marketing their school post COVID-19. Innovation and growth. The time is ripe. Technology has allowed us to turn schools on a dime and head in a different direction. So now really grab that and really look at where your competitive advantage might be. Engage the whole staff in this new norm and dreaming because COVID engaged the whole staff. In some ways, COVID was the greatest gift to marketers. Why? Because all teachers became marketers, probably for the first time that I know of that. We moved to a remote platform, all schools did. And I think principals just had a view that people would go home, they would do their job and they would do it particularly well. There was an inherent motivation of staff to do that because safety was paramount. They had a sense of brand loyalty. They had a sense that they wanted to do the best thing by their colleagues, their school, for the students, and they were grateful to have a job, let's be honest. But for teachers, there was a great pressure there because for the first time, parents could see into the classroom firsthand. They could see that sense of value, good or bad, and the levels of student engagement. And why did that happen? Because there was a compelling why. Staff wanted to return to their homes because of safety, but they also wanted to make sure that they would produce the best teaching and learning possible. So Simon Sinek always says, look, it all starts with why, and drill down and look at why you want to actually change in a particular way. So here I want you to ask two questions of yourselves as you look at that future focus. What did you miss during COVID-19? And if you say to me, oh, well, we missed face-to-face teaching, I'm going to say to you, why? You might say because of levels of student engagement. Why? If you ask why 7 times, you'll get down to the core reason of either what you missed or what you didn't miss, and use those answers to actually look at what your new normal could be. One of those things of what you didn't miss was traffic and getting to work. So look at the flexibility that can exist and should exist now in workplaces. I think we'd all say we didn't miss the nightly meetings and events. So don't put them back on the calendar too quickly. Really have a look at what you're going to add, what you're going to abandon, and what you're going to do differently. As I bring this to a conclusion, have a look at what your unique value proposition can be that can be built into your culture. What were the positive things that you saw in your culture during COVID? And I've spoken to a number of principals and they have been absolutely blown away by their communities. So spend a bit of time to celebrate that, communicate it, embed it, don't lose it. Having a look at that tile there from a Scrabble game, it just so happens that there are a number of little things that you can do along the way that add to a positive culture. But look at that. The C gives you the greatest value. So what did you see in culture in terms of a shift, and make sure that that continues to be your new culture, your new norm. And that's marketed to your new families and your new staff. What does a principal need from here on in? They need a hell of a lot of data, trend data regarding enrolments, re-enrolments, deferrals, withdrawals, because the landscape has changed and will continue to be a bit fluid for a while. We heard this morning about, the number of Qantas staff that will lose their jobs. Banking industries have lost their jobs. In a boarding school, that whole area of international students, I've got 7 overseas at the moment that we're continuing on a remote platform, but that whole market area of international students has changed fundamentally. So look at what your composition is and where you are going to either attract students or lose them. Data information, communicate regularly with your parents. How many grandparents had previously helped out with fees? Their superannuation, their situation has changed. Composition of parents, this one's critical. We have a large number of publicans, might account for a whole lot of things, but we do. People in the entertainment area. So they were hit hard. So have a look at the industries that your parents come from, because look at who you are directing your marketing towards. If you are a marketing person that's on the webinar, create a dream team to look at new and emerging value propositions. Identify those within your community to look at a different way of being, leading, living. Identify new ways of connecting with families and develop your next big thing, because other schools around you are, and you'll be left behind. So what is your unique value proposition that is a competitive advantage? So tips and takeaways: move from challenge to opportunity and do that really quickly. What has your community continued to see of you through this period of time? Use the power of why, drill down 7 times and look at what you've missed and not missed. Analyse and capture your data to inform your marketing, the who and the how and the what. And dream boldly, because this is a new horizon. You're crossing a new frontier. You need to be an anchor of hope and do it with positive, a whole lot of positive leadership, optimism, hope, and enjoy it.
I love that, Maureen. It was fantastic. I love that anchor of hope. Isn't it what would appear to be diametrically opposite words? Anchor, stuck in the mud, strange, but hope, it's beautiful. I love that 7 steps of why. Sounds like my kids. Why, Dad? Why, Dad? Why, Dad? But I love it. I love where it's going. I'll let Brad start to get ready for his presentation. While Brad is getting ready for a moment, I'm just going to ask the panelists to chip in and give their a few seconds thoughts about perhaps Patrick and Susie and Anthony while Brad is getting ready for his section. Any responses to Maureen's thoughts and words? Pat, have you got a few thoughts there?
Look, I've been scratching down some notes here, and Maureen, it's interesting, some of the themes that you've talked about. I've picked up on mine as well, and particularly, so might to talk a bit later on, is going to be about creating that new normal. I'm really interested in that whole idea of taking some time to delve into what our parents thought and what their experience was, because it's very easy to have a look, some self-analysis about, we think we did a pretty good job, we pat ourselves on the back. Yeah. And you'll get a little bit of feedback off social media, but you're going to get the cream there. So how do we dive a bit deeper? So that's certainly something I'm going to be looking into as soon as we possibly can.
Thank you.
Susie, just a quick thought, and Angie, a quick thought before you hand over to Brad.
Yeah, fantastic, Maureen. You can hear me, yeah? All good?
Yep.
One thing that struck me was when you were speaking about realigning your message and formulating your strategy. This is really your opportunity to look at competition, because strategy, that's what strategy is. It's not just about marketing, it's about looking at the outside, who's impacting your position. And I thought that was a really great point, and something that we all need to go ahead and take the next step on.
Yeah, absolutely. Anthony, any thoughts, any comments?
Well, I think that a lot of stuff that resonated for me was all on track with a lot of stuff that how we think about the market inquiry tracker. I know a lot of it, as you deal with COVID, Maureen, you're talking about a lot of the community and your current families, but you also pointed out you can't just stay, you've got to deal with your current families, but you've also got to look forward to your future families, and you can't drop the ball there. And it's to embrace what I took away was about leverage technology or thinking different, starting to look at ways to do things that you may not have done before, maybe even move outside of your own comfort zone, but at least to not say no to something so quick and start to think about, you know what, that might not be a bad idea. Let's implement something like a parent ambassador program or something, you know? So I thought it was great. Thanks for putting that together for us all. You're on mute, Greg.
Brad Whistle is founder of Image7, which is one of the largest marketing education support businesses in Australia. Brad and I go back a few years with Anthony, and we have a great working relationship with Brad and his team. They're sprinkled all across Australia. And Brad is really, because they're exposed to so many schools, I think at last count about 100, can really give this kind of helicopter view of what's happening maybe at an Australia-wide level. So Brad, I'm going to hand the conch to you, sir, and over to you for your presentation.
Fantastic. Just to confirm, you've got the screen okay?
Have indeed. Thank you.
Wonderful. Okay, quick little bit just about Image7 before we start. That's us. I won't go into it too deeply, but we've been doing this for a while, working with schools around Australia, excuse me, and indeed around the globe. So we help schools succeed in their marketing and their internal communications. We always like to approach these things from defining reality first up. Where are we? Where are we going? And today, the reality of what I'm going to present to you, I've tried to jam pack about an hour into 20 minutes. So we're going to go at 100 miles an hour. But the reality is that we are entering a very serious recession by any measure. We don't know what it's going to look like. And the reality is, from a marketing perspective, we're working in a fog. We can't see a lot of what's in front of us. What we have seen behind us is rapidly filling in, and there's not a lot of information that gives us either. So the conditions, circumstances, and the cause of it are unlike anything that we've met before. So it's impossible to predict how prospective and current parents are going to respond. So two key understandings that I think I want to establish right up the front. And the first one is understanding the monetary value of the enrolment transaction, and the second one is the intangible value of your school brand. So let's first of all, the lifetime value of an enrolment. You know, understanding this number, it's really foundational to constructing your marketing strategy. It's different for every school, but if you know the lifetime value of an enrolment for your school, you'll know how much money you can spend to attract enrolments. You will know how much to invest in various parts or the tactics that you pursue. So often we work with schools and we've got to work it out for them. They didn't have a really good idea of it. So it is actually really very easy. So the lifetime value is your tuition income plus income from the government, and multiply that by the average total years of the student enrolled at your school, and you'll have a lifetime value. So an example, your tuition fee might be $5,000 a year, might be getting $9,000 from the government, and say the average life of a student at the school is 6 years, that's $84,000. So when we put it in that context, a sale, one enrolment, is not a small sale. In this case, $84,000. Now we work with schools that are a lot less than that, and we work with schools that are way more than that. You know, the top fee schools in Australia now, if you're talking about a 13-year student life, you are talking over $500,000. Now that's right at the extreme top end, but it gives you an idea. This is not a small decision. So that's one part of the reality we're working with. The other is the intangible value of your brand. So first of all, we've got to define what this brand thing is, because it's one of those terms that has been used and abused so many times over the years that nobody's too sure quite what a brand is. But it is more than a logo. It's more than something that sits on the surface. It's the life of your school, and it's defined by your positioning, your brand promise, the traits and core values of the brand, and the brand story. So let's really take a couple of quick examples from the commercial world just to drive the point home. But before we do that, a brand definition. It's who you are, what you promise, and your ability and willingness to keep that promise. It's so important. The promise and your ability and willingness to keep that promise. So, brand promise, Avis, we try harder. They've actually been using that brand promise since 1962, believe it or not, and that is very much part of them. It started off as we're number 2, we tried harder, until actually in some markets they became number 1, so they couldn't use that anymore. Hungry Jack's, the burgers are better, I heard you all say it. The burgers are better at Hungry Jack's. That's their brand positioning, right or wrong. Brand traits. Virgin has got a brand traits. They like to be fun. They like to be the fight for the underdog and be the scrappy competitor. Coca-Cola, we all know what's happening in that photo. That's their brand story. When you drink Coca-Cola, you're with friends, you're having a good time. That's their brand story. So put all of that together and you end up with this thing called a brand asset. So what could be a brand asset name? It could be a name, is the name, just like Nokia. It actually is, Nokia is like a Kodak. It's nothing. It is what they make it out to be. It could be a logo, a tagline. We all know that, and yet that's not the firm's name. That's just their tagline. It could be a character, scary as that one might be, but it could be a character. Or it could be photos. These are actually a series of photos from a client of ours, the Scots College in Sydney, but you can see that the photography is developing a key consistent branding as we go through. So what's this really mystical thing that called branding that we all sort of hang on to? It is simply the process of creating and enhancing the brand assets, and then leveraging your school's personality to create customer relationship. Because at the end of the day, marketing doesn't make a sale, people make a sale. People make enrolments, not the marketing department. So what's the value of, I know we've got a few business managers and heads in the audience today, so the parents get easy interpretation of what you do and what makes you different, and it gives them increased confidence in their decision. That's critical. What does the school get? Well, you get improved efficiency and effectiveness of your marketing. That's really, really important. Marketing and branding as a subset of marketing is actually an efficiency mechanism. Business managers should be asking, how much money should we be putting into marketing to gain the efficiencies that we want?
Yeah.
It's increasing income potential so that you can fulfill your mission. It's not about increasing income full stop. It's about increasing the income potential so that you can fulfill your mission. It gives you a competitive advantage and it creates organisational equity. This brand is something that your school then owns. It has value. So what do parents really want? I want to take you through 4 graphs really quickly. And these come from the What Parents Want survey done by Independent Schools Queensland. And they're actually, we pulled these from the School Marketing Journal, which Image 7 publishes every term. But you can see down the bottom there, the long lines, family, friends and colleagues as sources of information, website, social media, other parents with children at the school, school open days, family members already attending the school. So you can see they're the biggies. And yet a lot of those, a large proportion of those, do rely on that interpersonal human contact, which all of a sudden has been severely limited during the pandemic. The next one, usefulness of school marketing. So you can see right out on the right-hand side there at 4.4 out of 5 one-on-one school visits. Then you've got school social media at the other end. That's only the 3. So I'd just be posing the question, picking up from Maureen, why? Why are we spending so much time on school social media? Don't get me wrong, it's important and it's absolutely part of the mix, but where are we putting our efforts? But also at 3.9 at the top there is the school open day. So this is all pointing to things that are the really important sources for parents, and they're getting taken away from us. Who do parents want to meet? Now this is a really interesting one. When parents are making a decision, who do they actually want to meet? So you can see the left-hand side there, they want to meet the school head. So those bars left to right are no importance through to extremely important. And then on the far right-hand side, the classroom teachers. Now, if you're a boarding school, there is another piece to that data which we took out of this. If you're a boarding school, the boarding master is also just as high as the school head. Now that's so if you're a boarding school, that's particularly important for you. But school heads, you're very much part of that enrolment process and that enrolment decision, and the classroom teacher is too. Classroom teacher even more so for junior schools, prep and such like. And finally, and this is really important for Catholic schools, consideration across the sectors. So in 2006, only 17% of those surveyed, when they were making their decision, actually considered the government sector, the Catholic sector and the independent sector. And 12 years later, that's risen to 31%. So the trend is consistent, it's clear. Your parents are actually choosing or putting you into a selection mix that is wider and wider. But the converse is also true, that you are in the mix for people who traditionally wouldn't have been considering you. So that is a trend that is real, and you should be definitely dialing into that one. So still looking at reality. So this is our new reality. Parents are looking for reassurance they're making good choice of their school choice. And yet there's fewer opportunities to deliver that in person. We've got to remember too that not all families are going to be impacted equally by this. It's a pandemic-induced recession. That's what it is. In fact, the inequality, if you like, of the impact will become more and more noticeable as we go on. And the student-parent experience is critical. We'll pick up on that a little bit more later. So every enrolment lead must be nurtured through the funnel. It's not enough just to say that the parent will find their way to the next level or they will inquire when they want to inquire. We've got to be really, really intentional about every inquiry that we've now got. So the recession's going to be like no other, and we've got to look for the guiding principles rather than follow really hard and fast rules. Paint by the numbers school marketing just isn't going to work in the pandemic. The rules have changed. So what are the what are those guidelines? Number one, don't arbitrarily cut your marketing budget. Now that's something that you'd totally expect a marketing guy to say. However, we're the people who often actually suggest that marketing budgets are cut because we can see it being not invested wisely, not into the right places. The key word that I want to talk to here, though, is arbitrarily, because, and this is a quote from, and I just love the guy's title, John Quelch, who's the Charles Edward Wilson Professor of Business Administration Emeritus at Harvard Business School.
That's a mouthful.
You've got to have a bigger business card to fit that on. But one day I aspire to a title like that. But the important part of the quote is, those who put customer needs under the microscope take a scalpel rather than a cleaver to the marketing budget and nimbly adjust, are more likely than others to flourish both during and after a recession. And that's research that came out of, they studied a whole bunch of organisations, both profit, not-for-profit, from every recession from the 1970s onwards. So they do know what they're talking about, but it's the scalpel rather than the cleaver. So no matter what your current strategy is, or even if you've got the absence of a strategy, but it's wrong to arbitrarily cut your spending across the board, because cutting all tactics equally disproportionately harms each tactic that you employ. I mean, it's just a matter of logics. If we say, and many of the schools that we work with have just said 1/3, 1/2 of the marketing budget has been cut. And don't get me wrong, I'm not actually advocating that shouldn't be the case. It's quite appropriate in the circumstances. But then just to say, let's go through the marketing budget and lop 1/3 off everything is wrong, because really what you're doing is you're harming the things that are your best chance of success while still funding the things that should be dropped. So it is absolutely about looking at everything and apportioning the resources you have appropriately. And from the school's financial position, it is going to be improved short term if you can just quickly lop money off everything. But long term, the brand will be weakened. And then when we come through this, and we will come through this, it's just going to take longer to essentially get the flywheel up and running again, to get that momentum. So instead of making deep cuts as a reaction to the recession, objectively examine where you're going to be investing your money and what kind of return you're expecting. Go through your marketing line by line. Guiding principle number 2, understanding recession behaviour. So families will prioritise expenditure. We've all done it. I'm sure we've all run it through in our head. What would happen? What would happen if my partner loses their job? What would happen if we all have to take a pay cut? What's going to go on here? But people tend to prioritise by going, well, there's essentials, there's treats, there's the postponables, and then there's the expendables. Won't go into those too deeply, but school fees for Australian families are almost always considered essential. Now, there's a number of reasons for that, which we won't go into too deeply, but each school's going to have different proportions of people who look at it as an essential or an expendable or a postponable. Point is, understand what you think your mix is in your school, and then adjust your communications and marketing messages accordingly. Don't just keep pumping out the same messages that you've always done. It's just wrong. This is a new and different world that we're talking to. While many of the values and the principles and your core brand promise is probably exactly the same, how you say it, the way you deliver it, the empathy with which you deliver those messages will need to change. Guiding principle number 3 is to analyse and track everything. And I pick up what Maureen was saying about data, and I was in furious agreement. But really, this should be a principle for you, regardless of whether we've got a pandemic-induced recession on. You should be analysing and tracking everything regardless. Digital marketing, not telling you anything you don't know, and your internal comms, you can be more precise, specific and measurable with your executions. We should be doing that. And it leads to more quantifiable results, typically than traditional outbound advertising. Now, again, I want just to be clear, I'm not here advocating for digital or for traditional. There are places for both, and both do their job well when used properly. But if you're looking for precise, specific and measurable executions, that leads you to digital. But everything starts with tracking and analytics. So there's this why question, Maureen. Examine why communications and marketing choices that are being proposed or you're proposing at your school. Ask, why are we actually making those proposals? There's only a few valid outcomes, and I want to just spend a little bit of time on these. One answer should be that the data shows we get better response or outcomes when we do it this way. This is the science trumps opinion, and the data says it works better. The second one is that this is an aesthetic decision that we believe adds value to the communication. In other words, it's not something that we've got data on, but it adds value. We are building the value proposition. The next one is that this is a test execution against the current best performing control execution. In other words, we are doing something this way. When we do X, we get Y. Except every now and then we're going to try a different version of X. At a low cost, we're going to do it, and if we got Y plus 1, that's great. Let's keep doing Y instead of X. But if it doesn't perform, we haven't lost the farm, but we do know what's working. And finally, as a valid answer could be that it's a brand communication designed to reinforce our positioning with current parents, but the data set's too small to make a decision based on results. So we've used our best judgment, and very important, it is on brand and it is on message. So something that's not on brand and not on message should never be considered. But if it's particularly to your school audiences, and when you're talking to a school, you know, even a relatively large school has got bargain in Australian school sizes, we're talking 1,500 families. That would be a big school. But 1,500 isn't a big data set, even if you had 100% trackability on something. So sometimes it does come down to making the best judgment call, but that judgment call should always be based on, is it on brand and is it on message? So they're really the only types of answers that could be considered valid to the question of why are we doing this and why are we doing it this way. So your ability to make data-driven decisions is going to be key to successfully charting the course for your marketing over the next few years, and it will be at least the next few years. And this is one thing that I can guarantee, is that as we come out of this, the need for data-driven decisions is not going to be any less. It's going to be increased, and it'll be just growing over as we go forward. So number 4 is focus on the current parents. You know, I'll always advocate this. The single most effective and efficient marketing dollar that you can spend is to first fix deficient parent and student experiences. It's not to do better ads. It's not to have a bigger, more wonderful, engaging digital campaign. It's actually to fix the experience. So if your enrolment process sucks, basically, then fix it, because that's going to have a bigger effect than doing a wonderful campaign. If when a parent comes to visit your school, the reception area looks unprofessional and messy, and the school grounds are untidy and unkempt, then fix it, because that is your first order of priority. That's focusing on current and the parents who are currently in your pipeline. Always the best family to have is your existing family. You know, keep them. Don't let them go because, again, pandemic-induced financial stress. Find ways to look after them and care for them and nurture them. And I've got to say the Catholic sector is better than any other sector, just hands down. So the other thing here is sorry, just jumping at a tangent for a moment, there are huge opportunities. This isn't all doom and gloom. There's huge opportunities for Catholic schools because, as everybody has experienced, as Maureen said, parents being able to look over the shoulder and join into the classroom. A lot of those parents, particularly at government schools, have not been impressed, and they're looking for something where they will get a better solution. And you've got a big audience there to pick up on. Very few Australian schools we've ever seen have dedicated a portion of their strategy, let alone their budget, to understanding and improving the experience of current parents. So that's one to consider. Think strategically about giving parents experiences that confirm their trust, and you can give them something to actively talk about. When parents have a good experience, it becomes a talking point which feeds that elusive word of mouth. We know from every study that we've ever done, and every international in a developed English-speaking world country that we've ever looked at, word of mouth is always the number one reason why students and parents will consider a school. There's daylight between that and the next one. So what can we do that actually feeds that word of mouth? Give them something to talk about. be remarkable in the truest sense of the word, worthy of remark. And acting on those findings about experience is going to be the low-hanging fruit if you're looking for an edge. That's the easy stuff to do, and it can usually be done really quite quickly. The trick is it's got to be sustained. It's not just a 1 week, let's have a blitz and tidy up the reception area. Sorry if there's any receptionists in here today. I'm not having a shot at you, but it's got to remain tidy. That's the point. And guiding principle number 5 is to test, tweak and repeat. So marketing doesn't force prospective parents to change their intentions about which is the school that they're going to enrol in. You know, the best you can do is to figure out the formula that nudges them along the journey towards the decision. And the only way that you can do that is by testing new approaches, like we talked about before, tweaking the existing executions, then pivoting your strategy when necessary, then doing it all again. This is a never-ending process. You go on and on and on. And it's exciting. And I might be the data geek. Well, with the Campitellis in the room, I'm not the data geek, but I might be the data geek. But I love being able to go, we turned this dial and that happened. And I'm sure that you will do it too once you see it. But schools have a habit of doing what they did last year, and they'll change their yearbook or their annual or their magazine, and they'll do it exactly the same, and they'll just say, oh, we put a new photo on the cover. That's not testing and tweaking. You can't win the game if you don't know the score. You've got to know the score. Get the data. Tracking and capturing, it's going to be more accurate, more granular information about every strategy, opportunity or lead allows you to see what your competitors aren't. Your competitors aren't necessarily doing this. And let me tell you, in the independent school sector, even some of these, what you figure are the high fee schools that are doing this really well, they're not, okay? They're living off their reputation. And you can't get better results if you don't do, tests of new tactics and evaluate old ones. By definition, if you're not doing tests and evaluating old ones, you're either dead in the water or you're taking blind stabs in the dark, neither of which I would want to be doing. So with each round of tests, you've got to tweak and repeat. You're refining your school's approach and you're getting better, always getting better, always moving forward. And school marketing is more of a science than an art, more today than ever. To make data-driven decisions, you've got to have the data. So as you'd expect, the tips and takeaways, don't arbitrarily cut your marketing budget, understand the recession behaviour, analyse and track everything, focus on your current parents, and get into the habit of test, tweak, and then repeat.
Thank you, Brad. That was fantastic. While Anthony is just preparing to pick up on the next presentation, Brad, I'll get you to stop sharing your screen if you wouldn't mind. A couple of things resonated with me, that brand promise. Isn't it interesting? There's a brand promise one could suggest has been broken. The brand promise was my child would have access to science facilities and sporting areas and all these other things that I've been denied access for the last 12 weeks or however long it's been. So one could argue there potentially has been a breach of brand promise. I loved your point about the lifetime value of one enrolment. I wouldn't mind timing that by 5, Brad. I'd like to have, because very rarely do we enroll one in person. Often it's a child and a sibling and a cousin and a friend. So there's a multiplier effect that we could reasonably apply. And I loved your reference to brand. And I was musing on this with Anthony the other day. And in the end, everyone's got a brand. Every teacher, every parent, everyone's got a brand. And people don't understand that brand is what other people say about you when you're not in the room.
Yep.
And there it is. And so I'm now going to hand over to Anthony. Thank you very much. Just mindful of time, we might just switch rapidly onto the next speaker, who's going to perhaps segue nicely into all that data-driven, because there's been a few questions coming off the chat saying, well, hey, how do we capture the data, Brad? I think Anthony might have the answer for us.
Hey, thanks.
Anthony, Anthony is my brother, co-founder of Inquiry Tracker. Anthony probably won't say this too much himself, but he has been working with all the big tech giants in Silicon Valley for the last 30 odd years, and senior head of marketing positions for global satellite companies, Apple, Adobe. He's built scalable marketing solutions for these companies, and he comes exceptionally well credentialed and very proud. He is the older brother. I'm the younger brother.
Thanks for pointing that out, Greg. I feel a lot older sometimes, especially at the moment. Anyway, that's awesome. And I just have to say, you know, Brad, everything I was just nodding my head as I'm watching all your slides going, yep, this is it. This is exactly right. This is exactly what they have to do. Why do schools cut their budgets and not focus on the right things? It dumbfounds me sometimes. So I'm actually going to focus on some stuff that's really tangible. I want to talk about how schools can actually embrace technology to build relationships and grow their pipeline. And someone asked me about the definition of marketing, and I thought about it for a while ago, and this happened a long time ago. I said, marketing is all about relationships. It's establishing a trust and credibility, delivering your brand so that you are the trusted advisor. But it's really about establishing this relationship so that the person who wants to put up their hand and come to your school or learn about your school says, I resonate with this school, I resonate with this message, I resonate with this brand. It's all about relationships. And that to me is a lot about your word bank that you use. It is your tagline. It's all these things that resonate. So they're going to be very important to think about as you go forward. Okay, there we go. So why is this even important in the first place? Well, first of all, as Brad was just stating, and Maureen said it earlier, but the lifeline of every school is future enrollments, right? And with I'll say even with the current pandemic, even here in California, the cases on the rise, they're going to probably put more restrictions back in place. And for most schools here at the moment in California are all closed for their summer break. But for the last 4 months, all campuses have been closed, and they may be closed in the fall when they open up again. And interestingly, I was talking to a school the other day, and they said, oh yeah, well, our policy is to open up in the fall, but we've got a number of families complaining they don't want to send their kids back in the fall, so we're going to have a plan. We're going to have maybe partial opening. So you may not be aware, who knows what might happen. So one of my tips here is be prepared. The other thing is virtual tours, which is what a lot of you, and I know that Susie might even talk about, or Patrick might talk about it later in the session today, is schools are running virtual tours. If you can't have families visit your campus, do them virtually. And I don't just mean like a video tour. I mean like what we're doing here, but doing a Zoom meeting or a Google meeting where you're looking at the person through your computer and you're talking to the principal and you're answering questions. They get to see students who participate. But this is now, I believe, going to be the new normal. It's not going to be, oh, we're going to go back to our open days and private tours. I guarantee you that if you don't keep virtual tours in your arsenal, it'll be a big mistake. I firmly believe that it's now part of the normal. And to Brad's point where, these families from these different, considering schools across different sectors, it allows you to broaden your reach. Even if they have to travel a few miles, they may be willing to travel more, or if they know they can learn about your school virtually. So they are going to be normal.
Anthony, if I can just interrupt there for a moment, I'm just on your home slide. Have you been sharing your slides?
Yes.
Maureen, can you see Anthony's slide deck or not? No, we're not seeing his slide deck, Anthony. It's sharing his screen, but it's still in the resting slide. So if you could just adjust that for a moment, please. Just now we have your slide. Yes, we have that slide. And if you put into slideshow, I can see that.
That's all I had, yes.
Now it's good. Now it's back to you. Over you go.
Are we looking at because the world has changed?
I can see why it is important is what I can see at the moment.
Just give me a second here. We're going to figure out why it's not changing for some reason, Greg.
Yep, that's okay. I'll just let you get your thoughts there for a moment. We certainly had that last screen on board. We've got the beautiful San Francisco background at the moment while you're just getting ready. That would be fine. because the world has changed is what I can see on my slide deck at the moment. So that's good to go. Over to you.
Can you see why is this important now?
We could see because the world has changed is the screen we're seeing at the moment.
Okay, it's not working.
Now I can see why it's important. So just leave it on that screen, I think. Don't worry about the builds. Just keep going.
Okay. Okay. So, as Brad was pointing out, schools are going to need to focus on marketing and comms more than ever before. You just have to double down. Like, this is a time where you have to get the word out. You have to know who your target market is. And I always like to say is there is the right family for your school and the wrong family. It's not any family. You've got to be able to focus on the right market that you want to bring to your school for the right reason. The other thing is the population, not only in your target market, but it's also staff. It's the population is getting a bit more time rich. They're time poor. They didn't have time. They're working at home. A lot of people are working at home. A lot of companies are announcing that they're going to have a work at home policy as a standard policy going forward. So they are going to be in the classroom. For those schools that are doing virtual classes, they're going to have more time on their hands to do research as well. But also, what doesn't change for a lot of schools, a lot of them don't have massive marketing budgets and marketing staff. We did a survey here in the US for about 500 Catholic schools, and I think, Greg, the average marketing team was less than 2, I think it was.
About 1.5, you're absolutely right.
Something like that. So we know that you're time poor because you're getting pulled in every different direction. And the other thing about, I think, schools, a lot of it, it's this sort of like a technical level of, I don't want to say inexperience, but this sort of tech poor in a way that I say, hey, you've got to go and integrate with MailChimp and make sure you're doing all this. You go, well, I don't have time to do that. And I can't afford to pay a consultant to do it. So you've got to figure it out because you've got to use technology to solve these problems. You absolutely have to. If you don't, you're making, I'll tell you what's going to happen is you're probably going out of business is what I think. Because leads are going to come in online by your website. In fact, you probably are all very aware of this school here, Presentation College, Windsor in Melbourne. This school, Greg, help me, how many years has it been around?
It's the oldest Catholic college in Victoria, and it will close. And now beautifully situated in the inner city of Melbourne, and it was inexcusable that this actually closed. And it's a long story, but we won't go into it. But I think, as you said, Anthony, they're not Robinson Crusoe. Look at that stat in America.
Yeah, so this is a stat that was published by the National Catholic Education Association here in the States, that in just 2018-19, 93 Catholic schools closed, right? Now, that may not seem like a lot for a place the size of the US and this population, and probably with the thousands and thousands of Catholic schools, but the fact is they're closing, right? Because people have choices. Some of the public schools here are very good with their education, so you've got to be able to get to these schools in a way that make the most sense. So I'm going to start to get into these sort of some tangible things that I think you can do. Here's a school that's based in Tasmania, and what I'm wanting to point out is there is a goal that every website has to have, right? And the number one goal of your website, your school website, it should be leads, right? It is not anything else. Like I don't even say, what about alumni or what about current families? Yes, you can't ignore them. Yes, they'll be able to find the button, but it doesn't need to be front and center, right? What needs to be front and center is some families coming to look and say, I want to think about if I'm going to send my child to this school. They're the ones you want the eyeballs. The current families know where the parent portal is. Alumni know where to go to log in. They all either have an app on their phone or they know what to do. Trust me. I've had 2 girls go through this whole exercise. I knew exactly the login. It was bookmarked. I never went to the school website ever. I just went to the bookmark. I always knew where to go. So make sure, this is a big tip. Are you focusing, is your website focused on capturing leads, right? And I will tell you, right, that the sources that we see at Inquiry Tracker We have a CRM for schools, for private and independent schools to manage their future family pipeline. And we know that the 4 sources that inquiries come in through, open days, open houses, and school tours is sort of the one that Brad was putting on his diagram earlier on, his spider chart. They're making general inquiries on your school website, or they're doing that one-on-one personal tour, or they're making a view book or a prospectus request where they're getting it. And I also know that through the data that we have, and we have over 100 schools using Inquiry Tracker that represents close to, I'd say, 70,000 inquiries in the system. And when we analyze the data anonymously, I know that 94% of the leads that come in are online, right? And that's going to be either a website form, like a general inquiry of some sort, or an event registration form, or a prospectus request form, right? And you can see there are going to be some in-person, phone, and email. And this is real data that I've been analyzing, right? So you want to make sure that those people, that traffic that's coming to your website is focused on your future families, number one. Number two, that they can find one of those forms on your website, right? Don't hide it. Make it front and center. And I think, I know I like to talk about Salesian, and Susie's going to come up. They do a great job on their website. They have one button in the top right corner, book a tour. I think it's a great move. I really do. I think it's the right way to capture your leads. So we're going to talk about this sort of cycle where we want to engage with a family. You want to communicate them. You want to amaze them. This is part of your brand experience, right? And you want to over deliver. This is also part of your brand experience. So it's remember, brand is so much more than the logo, as Brad was saying. It's how you answer the phone, how they feel when they come into reception, the email that they get from you, how quickly did they get that email? Do they think that you care about them, or are you just another cog in the wheel, so to speak? So we are going to go through this cycle here. So the first thing is find the form on your website. So here's that same site before, and you can see up the top here, they've got these little buttons, request a prospectus, book a tour, or apply now. So they're the 3 sort of web-based type of actions that the family could do. Or you could even put this honking button right on the middle here to say register for a tour. It's something that I would consider doing as a good idea, all right? So I want you to make sure that when you put like a book a tour or book a virtual tour, and I think you should leverage virtual tours, don't hide from those. Make sure you can still engage with your prospects proactively, and ensure that you leverage technology. So if someone does fill out a form on your website, make sure they get a personalized email automatically. Don't just have them go into a Google Sheet and not respond to them, or some other database, or into your student management system that you can't figure out how to automate an email from. You're going to have to figure this out. And of course, as a plug for our own stuff, this is exactly what we do at Inquiry Tracker, and a lot of schools across Australia are using it. The other thing is remember that bit about relationship building, provide educational content to help these families make decisions. So if you're asking the right questions on your forms, you can provide better content. So if you've got a daughter who's interested in robotics, make sure you go to the trouble of sending them some robotics information versus the gym class or something, all right? So it's critical to capture this right information so you can segment it. So we're going to focus on these 3 core pillars of your pipeline, right? So the key thing is to build your pipeline, to make sure you're communicating with your families, and to look at the data. If you're not looking at the data, you're just going with your gut, and you're going to be wasting your time. You've got to analyze the data. So on the pipeline, if you're looking at your pipeline, you just need to know, obviously you need to know the students' details. You need to know what calendar year they're going to start, and you want to know what intake year level they're going to start at. So they're going to start at year 7, 2023, right? And if you can, find out their interests, like robotics or polo or whatever it is, so that you can market to that with the next phase, which is the communication. So now with, I often recommend this to schools because I think it's not enough just to communicate via email. I think you do have to call them on the phone. You should have their mailing address because you might want to slip them some nice information packet in the mail to them as well. So you want to have this multi-touch communications program, I think is important. Then on the analytics side, aside from running digital campaigns and setting up, analytics like Google Analytics or whatever analytics program, you've got to have all that to track your digital campaigns. I always like to know two things. One is the lead source, like where did they come in on your website, or how did the lead get entered into your system? That's one thing, like are they filled out a form or they attended a personal tour? That might be a lead source. But then the other one is declarative, is how did they hear about you? And this is to the point that Brad was talking about, was often they say, I live in the area, or word of mouth, or friends and family, or past student. That's the common ones, right? In fact, I think I may have a slide on this a little later on. So when you have a form on your website, don't have too many questions. Limit which fields are actually going to be mandatory. And I won't go into all the details of which ones I think and why, but just, you can always test this, but don't make the mandatory ones too long. Just get the bare minimum that are mandatory, all right? The second thing is use data entry aids like radio buttons, check boxes, drop down or pick lists to increase your data integrity and have better reporting for when you do your data collection, so you get accurate reporting and analytics. So then you can get better insights. If you have WOW or pillar programs at your school you want to promote, you might want to find out some certain students are interested in those and capture those programs. You might want to know what current school they're coming from. So this could dictate what sort of marketing programs you might do. If you can start to see leads are dropping off from a typical school that would often feed you more students than they may have in the past, then you need to look into it. And as Greg said, he's talking about the additional multiplier effect of lifetime value. Maybe you should ask about their siblings, and this is an opportunity to capture some additional information. You can do that. Now, when data comes in, when I know we spoke to a lot of schools, they say, well, we've got, the admissions staff that they are taking one set of inquiries. They've got just a general inquiry where they're making a prospectus request or make a phone call or send an email. But if they make a phone call, it goes to one person. If they make an email, it goes to another, where they're storing all that. So you end up with these different silos of data where things are being run by different people, but they're all these future families that live in these different disparate systems. And unfortunately, some of those things aren't in a centralized database. They're in a spreadsheet, a Google Doc, or God forbid someone's inbox in their email, or a Post-it note on their desk, because that's where they'll all get stored. So first, this next tip, aside from making sure it's easy for people to find out how to fill out a form on your website, is store all your leads in a centralized database. Make sure you do that, and make sure it's accessible for all those different constituents at your school to access, right? Because now when you have all these staff members that can access it, then you're going to save massive amount of time, right? If you have data flowing into a database with an email going out automatically, you've just saved yourself 15 minutes for every inquiry. It's just going to keep building up, because remember, every inquiry is going to add to a report. Like, how many leads do we have for year 7 in 2023? Let me go through my email inbox and count them, And then you can obviously forecast your pipeline, and then you can conduct more targeted marketing, all right? All right, so you could obviously make a website, you could make a general inquiry, or you could register for a tour. Let me just go through 2 examples here. So if someone went to your website to request a prospectus, they could fill out a form, and they would get a very simple email automatically where they could click a link and get it. So that's something that you should set up and automate. Follow on maybe a day later. If you did ask the right question, you knew that they were interested in a specific program, you could drop them in something in the mail that highlighted that content. Then you could reach out and call them, get their feedback from it, find out what their child's area of interest, or find out what the family's concerns are, and invite them on a tour. And then the last thing is you could go off and send more educational content to educate them about a tour, or get them to come to a virtual tour, or do something else, right? But the goal is always big, to get a lead to visit your school. That's the number one way. If you can get someone to come to your school, or you can talk to them, there's a higher probability of doing it. Well, you can do them on site, and some of those have been restricted, or you can do remote tours, right? So you can do video tours or 360 tours or live meetings, right?
And to just on that, if I could ask, just go back a slide, just because there's been a lot of people doing video tours and 360 tours. Have you got any commentary, thoughts, or ideas around sort of the tour, the video tour versus the kind of live hosted virtual tour? What any thoughts around that?
I think video tours are great if you've got that asset. If you haven't, you can always get your students to help assemble that asset, or there's companies that certainly do that. But the live meetings, and I don't mean like what we're doing here, this is a webinar where you've got people talking and you're listening, taking notes. I'm talking about like a Google Meet or a Zoom meeting, and I've got a slide that I'm going to show you about that in just a minute. But I highly encourage you to conduct those live meetings, and Patrick and Susie might be able to talk about that as well, because they've been conducting those.
Thank you.
I'll touch on that when I get to my presentation, but we've certainly done a live stream tour this year, actually doing another one tomorrow for our international market. So I'm happy to talk about that in a moment.
Thanks, Pat.
Yeah, the cons with those video tours, Greg, as you're saying, is that you can't interact with them really, and you may not have one handy. So that people want to talk to you. So this is why we like the virtual tours. They're live meetings, demonstrate you're accessible. Families can get to know you. They get to see your face. They can ask questions and engage. And of course, you can still promote video content during those, right? So the example, this is not going to work very well because I can't build it anymore, but if someone registered for a tour, they get thanks for registering, and you'd send them a calendar invite with like the Zoom or Google Meet credentials. That's really important. The second thing, you'll get a reminder the day before. And the reason why you want to send them a reminder is you don't want them to forget, because if you're running an event that's multiple weeks out or month out, they may forget. This is why it's important to have the calendar invite and send them the reminder, automate that. And then you want to amaze them with when you deliver the event. You could either do your virtual tour, like a Zoom meeting that you can see down here in this thumbnail, or you can have a great impression when you have your students check in families who are coming in. Because remember, one of the big influences are students at the school. And so if you've got your student ambassadors greeting families as they come on campus, or have your student ambassadors participate in a virtual tour, it's key. I think it's really important to consider these elements. And they could use something like Inquiry Checker. We have an iPad version that you can check in families, and you can see who's come to events and who's not come to the event. And then, of course, you want to do a follow-up, because if you knew that they came, you'd say, thanks for attending. And then you could do a quick survey. Remember, I think Maureen was talking about, asking questions, making sure you understand the why. Well, you should ask, how was our event and what did you think of it? And get them to fill out a survey. And a big side tip here is, have your students analyze the results. Have them report on it and see what they come up with. You might be surprised. And then, of course, if they didn't attend, they get the sorry we missed you email. And then I've only got a couple more slides here. And of course, you could follow up and reach out and call the families, and then send them something in the mail again, maybe a week later. So you'll see all this in the presentation that you get in the recording, but this is a standard sort of nurture funnel. Brad was talking about nurturing your families down the funnel. You want to use the technology to do it, because then you can do it at scale, all right? And this is certainly how we do it at Inquiry Tracker, where we display your full funnel. We have geographic maps so you know where families are coming from. We do personal tours, big events, up to 800, 1,000 attendees we've had at Inquiry Tracker events for schools. And it does all that automation for you. So my takeaways for you are, make it easy to find the forms on your website. Don't hide them. Get a centralized solution and manage your inquiries. Make sure you automate the follow-up process. It's absolutely critical in today's world. I still recommend you continue to run live hosted virtual tours. I think they're going to be a key asset for you. I'd add buttons to your header. I would really make sure it's easy for them to find the items that they want. And then I think I would select a software platform to collect the interests of students as well, then automate that the communications process to build those relationships with families. And that's it, Greg.
Thank you very much, Anthony. And of course, that's why Inquiry Tracker was built, because it does everything that Anthony just described and that Brad was referring to about data capture and data analytics. Thanks so much. Sorry for a bit the issue around the slide building, but I think everyone got the messages there. Just one question, Anthony, from Nicole. What would you recommend is the right number of people to do a live hosted Zoom virtual tour? Is it 5? Is it 10 families? Is it 20 families? Is it 30 families? Any idea of what you would suggest as a right number?
I'm going to defer to, we've got two experts here. Susie and Patrick have done these, and I'd rather them chime in what they think works well, because they've got first-hand experience.
All right, let's hand over to Susie McAvale, who's a champion down at Salesian College, Chadstone. She's a great asset there and has championed some of the best programs I've seen. In fact, their student ambassador program is probably a benchmark for how to do a great student ambassador program. And I know she's using Inquiry Tracker and also a great supporter of Catholic Schools Guide. Susie, over to you and to share your screen, please.
No worries. Just to answer that question, I actually wouldn't put a limit on it. I don't think there is. We've had up to 40 at a time sometimes, which is fantastic. Yeah, so the answer to that question would be I wouldn't really put a limit on it. That's the beauty of going virtual.
Thanks, Susie.
Okay.
So Susie, get a screen organised and then we're ready to go. Okay, Susie, we can see your screen.
You can see. Beautiful. Okay, thanks, Greg. Hi, everyone. It's really lovely to be here with you. Today, I'm going to speak to you about something that I feel very passionate about, and that has produced visible results for us here at Salesian College in Chadstone, here in Melbourne. And that is the value of demonstrating the link between your vision, your mission, and your values to your messaging. Now, I say the word demonstrate because without illustrating, really, they're only worth the words that are written on the page, on a website, on a social feed, and people, like others have echoed today, they don't just want words, they actually judge on their experience and what they see and how they feel. So as we go through these slides, you'll notice descriptive words that are there. They're actually our college values here at Salesian, which we've linked to actions that have actually been taken. So I'm sure it's etched within everyone's memories, the intensity of everything when it all hit back in March, which feels like, Maureen, you said a lifetime ago, and I couldn't agree more. This intensity period has gone, or so we think, for the moment, I want to just take us back a step with the how you're making it visible to your audience that you're navigating COVID. So the reality is this pandemic is far from over. Greg, you mentioned before that here in Victoria, restrictions have been tightened as of midnight on Sunday, last Sunday. So it's something we're living with and it's not going away anytime soon. On time, clear, concise communication is absolutely critical when we're demonstrating that how. So there's a couple of tips here. Firstly, gain clarity about your school's message and position. And the second is to communicate that message as concisely as you can. And we've got some great examples around us to look at. Maybe like the ABC News app is a great example of conveying short, sharp summaries. And the whole intention behind why you want to make it concise is so that you're making it as easy for the audience to digest. And of course, with any type of important communication, timing is absolutely critical. So work on getting it out as soon as you possibly can, which I know has been a massive challenge that we've all been encountering during COVID. So this is how we demonstrated it here at Salesian. How we at Salesian demonstrated on-time, clear communication. Now, theoretically, this kind of flips the website thinking on its head, in that usually you'll have a really short website, so you're keeping the user on there and you're going to engage them for a longer period on your site, which is ultimately the objective. This kind of changes that thinking. We did a rolling summary, a rolling comms timeline history, which really demonstrated based on dates how we've navigated that journey from day one. Now, I'm a strong believer in, to solve the issues of tomorrow, we really have to be thinking ahead of the game today. So plan ahead where you can and be strategic. Listen to the concerns of your audience and integrate that into your communications. Now, that requires a couple of things. A, that requires you to be open to start with, and to understand the fact that your audience even have needs and that you are open to meeting those, and to be open to feeding that into your direction, being that second point. Being socially responsible is an area that's really being highlighted right now in COVID that I think is really relevant. We're seeing a lot of wonderful change out there in our world right now, and humans are really taking an ethical stand more than they ever have. So factor that into your decision-making processes. For us, turning virtual tours virtual was an example of how we chose to act proactively. So we started operating from the first full week of term 2 here in Victoria, which was a bit of background work in the holidays and a bit of wonderful back and forth with inquiry tracker, which we really valued. But we can confidently say that now we're really comfortable with the process, and so are our parents. So if COVID's taught any of us anything, it's that this growth mindset is not just from within a classroom. It's actually a lifetime journey that we're all on if we're wanting to develop and grow. So right now, it's an opportunity to really live out and show our audience what a growth mindset actually means. I think it's valuable to acknowledge that the parameters are constantly changing right now. They're constantly moving. We're all faced with this really interesting dilemma of rethinking efficiency. Not only do we need to adapt to this change, but we also need to be open to editing along that journey and that road, perhaps more than we would have in the past. And I know that can sometimes be frustrating, but that's just the reality that we're working within. One of the greatest examples of growth mindset is how the classroom environment really moved to virtual within an extraordinary turnaround time. For us here at Salesian, supporting that delivery of teaching and learning, which I'm sure many of you have done similar things, was another area where we could really value add from a development and marketing team perspective. There's a girls' school here in Melbourne, Avila, and they did an amazing job actually with their remote continuity of learning video communications to their community, which was a really shining example of innovation. There's some really great stuff being done out there. If Avila's on today and hooking in, a big well done to those people. Relevant and compassionate messaging is more important than it's ever been right now. That beautiful quote from Maya Angelou, people will forget what you said, they will forget what you did, but they will not forget how you made them feel. And I thought that was a really beautiful and relevant quote to add into this angle, because using emotional intelligence to look at what experiences resonate with your audience is how is really key to understanding how your audience is feeling, and also that next key step in understanding what that next communication point is. So maybe ask yourself the question, how can we foster and grow this connection through authentic messaging? For us, Mother's Day this year looked a little bit different to what it would have in the past, and it was important that we created a virtual event as well as personalised gifts to ensure that our mums really felt that sense of connectedness. So we linked two overarching messages. We had a thanks mum from our students and a thanks to our medical mums, which on a collective front to all the mums in our community who worked on the front line, connecting our community to the global experience. If we cast our minds back to May, and I know Maureen, you did touch on this, many people were really having to dig deep at that time just to get through the everyday. It was really hard. And we wanted to specifically acknowledge that effort that people were going into and giving. So, Brad, like you were mentioning, you know, marketing involves insight data, and that's absolutely crucial to the bigger picture. So to give you some insight data on our Mother's Day, we know that this is an event that resonates with our audience. In 2014, we had 75 people turning up. In 2019, we had 430. So we've worked really hard at getting those numbers. It hasn't just happened overnight. But going virtual, we were really curious to see how it was going to land with people. And that came to fruition, and going virtual, we actually connected with over 6,000 users of engagement, which was phenomenal, and generated quite a substantial amount of positive PR. So well beyond what we imagined we could have been able to do. So
that's an extraordinary result, Susie.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? And I think the key there is really understanding these are the kind of possibilities that are out there if you're willing to take that next step. And I think, you know, to pivot and to be able to be courageous enough to pivot.
Yeah, here.
Telling relevant stories that connect your audience will absolutely pay dividends. So one of the silver linings that I think of COVID is this common ground that we've all experienced. So what felt like overnight, we were all catapulted into this global experience where we're more connected than we've actually ever been, which is actually, there's a real beauty in that. So what better opportunity was this and is this to authentically connect and really grow your brand loyalty? It was clear to us that our biannual Griffin magazine had one very clear theme, and it was clear because we could see it living out in action right in front of us, and that was we are stronger together. So we featured a range of stories within this issue, but it included a cover story leading through crisis with our past student, Sasha Lawrence. Now, Sash happens to be the CEO of the Reach Foundation. So for those of you who are aware, it's the Jim Steins founded Australian charity. And we gained a huge amount of traction from within and outside our community with this story. Sash he's a phenomenal guy, and he had some beautiful advice for people that I thought would be really appropriate for this forum. Now, he focused on thinking ahead of the game, the value of trusting and galvanizing his team, and the power of humility with self and with others, because right now, no one's actually the expert. We're all learners, and we need to be curious and humble enough to say so. And I just thought that was really wrapped it up quite beautifully. Sasha's actually not even 30 yet. So I love that dimension of him being young and up and coming and having so much wisdom that is gleaned from other people throughout his life. So it's our intention when we do these sorts of things, and perhaps you're doing them too, or maybe it's where perhaps you want to head to. This is our intention to share stories of people within our community who inspire and encourage us to be better in the world. So tapping into the global experience is absolutely vital right now. There are a couple of valuable questions worth asking. One, how are your students and parents coping right now? Quite honestly, sitting down and asking yourself that question and bringing other people, of course, involved in that conversation. And the second one is what scaffolding is needed to support them and really help the school meet their objective of developing student learning, because at the end of the day, that's what we're here for. We reflected on these particular specific questions, and we took steps with subject matter experts around understanding anxiety, because collectively as a world, we know and we can see that this is a topic that really connects many people across the lifespan. So when it comes to communicating, it's important to remember that positive and optimistic tones echo resilience. So tone is important because it gives you the difference between hope and indifference. So perhaps ask yourself, what sort of school do parents actually want for their kids growing up in? And how can a school, how can a marketing, how can a development, a communications department really echo that support and hope through their messaging? So I ask you, what strategies are useful for members of your community? And how do you align your organisation's values to this global experience? Keeping it student-centric is absolutely crucial. So along this journey, we've been hyper aware that opportunities for students really have been diminished. So what support do they need? Maybe it's collegiality, maybe it's a voice, maybe it's a vehicle to be heard, maybe it's a leadership opportunity. So how can we best support them in their learning? This image here is an IGTV post that the students actually, off their own bat, put together, but at the end of term one, and we all remember how crazy the end of term one was. This is our captain and our vice captains here, and they even actually reached out to a couple of past students who just happened to play for Western United and Richmond Football Club. And they created this video with the intention of really reminding students and our community to respect the process of lockdown. You know, this was a necessary measure that our society was needing to take, and that no one was alone in this process, because collectively we're in it together. And I just thought that beautifully summed up exactly what we're on about and what many of us here in this forum are on about. I think it's worth recognising your efforts today, each one of you who's hooked in, for reaching out and connecting. I think that's really important to acknowledge that. And I say that because leaning on your networks actually allows you to achieve so much more than what we can do by ourselves. So bring together your team. Don't be afraid to do that. Communicate your plan with them. Bring them in and discuss your ideas and be open to actually learning from them. Give back to your community where you can. Be prepared to pay it forward to others navigating the landscape. I genuinely believe in that. That's why I'm partaking in this forum today. We were really grateful for Inquiry Tracker when it came to turning to tours virtually. We had no idea that we'd be feeling so confident this time now that we've been through this. So that was really appreciated and something that I would encourage you to do. Excuse me, not COVID, by the way. After after we had it down pat, we were approached actually by a couple of independent schools here in Melbourne that were wanting to do the same thing, and we were absolutely more than happy to help share some of that intel. I honestly believe that the more that we can help each other, the better we're going to support the students, our communities, and in turn our industry, which I think can only be a good thing. So tips and takeaways. On time, clear, concise communication as well as you can. Plan ahead. Living out this growth mindset, not just talking it. Incorporating emotional intelligence within your communications. Connecting through a common experience. Asking really what scaffolding is needed and what does your community need at this time. Be mindful of your tone. Keep it student-centric. Reach out and connect. Ultimately, Aligning your vision, your mission, and your values to your messaging is what's going to be key to you heading in the right direction. And that's my thoughts.
That's fantastic, Susie. Thank you so much. What a beautiful presentation. And thanks so much to all the delegates who are staying on. We've still got the full complement, everybody. I will ask you if you could stay on. We've got Patrick Kelly coming up. Save the best to last. He's the gun. Give him a big pump up. Pat, we've got about 20 minutes for you, and then we've got a 15-minute Q&A panel. And I will ask everyone if you can stay on for the end of the Q&A, because we're joined by Cameron Bailey on that one, just to give courtesy of the panelists for giving up their time. And we've got some special offers that we're going to give right at the very end. So I'd be very grateful if everyone could just hang in for another 40 minutes or so. I'd be most grateful. So Patrick, without further ado, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Greg. You got me there.
Yes, Pat. Yes, Pat. We've got it.
Goes back to my my school days when I was in the debating team. Third speaker negative was always the very last one to speak. So you taking copious amounts of notes during the presentation. One of the things that's been gratifying for me going last this time is I'm able to look back at the presentations that we've seen so far, and there's so many common threads running through them, and I'm pleased to say that there's lots of stuff that we've been doing this year that really pick up on those as well. So thanks very much for the opportunity to be part of it and to speak with everyone today. What I want to do is talk you through how our team at Blackfriars has handled some of the challenges that have been thrown up in 2020 and what we've taken from these experiences that are helping us to create what everyone's now calling the new normal. A bit of a rider, the examples I'm presenting aren't meant to be portrayed as being necessarily best practice, but simply what have really appeared to work for us in the first half of this year. Brad talked a little bit earlier about making sure that we're trying to get feedback from people. So it's about using data, using real quantitative feedback from people to assess whether or not you are on the right track. And what I'm basing the elements of this presentation on is the feedback we've received so far from our families via social media commentary, direct calls and messages, plus personal contacts that we've had. And also on the basis that we've had a couple of other organisations that have contacted us about sharing what we've been doing as well and wanting to know more. I'm not assuming that there are no families in our constituency who would have preferred to find out things in different ways and using alternative channels. However, I suppose at this point, what I can say is that we haven't received any complaints or messages to the Development Office that have expressed disappointment or a lack of information that's been provided by Blackfriars at this stage. Importantly, the other thing is we haven't seen a drop in our enrolment inquiries from 2019 to 2020 at this stage. And for the first time in about 7 years, the school's actually been in a little bit of a decline in enrolments, but based on our current numbers, this will be the first year in about 7 years that we're heading into a new year with a stable enrolment base. So in spite of this crisis, I think we seem to be weathering the storm quite well at this point.
Patrick, if I may, sorry, I just was wanting to make sure you were sharing your screen. Sorry, there you go.
Yeah, sure.
We've got an image of the boys on that we're seeing.
Right. So I just wanted to give you some context about our school and my particular office. So Blackfriars is an all-boys Catholic school, reception to Year 12, established in 1953 by the Dominican Friars. We've also got a co-educational early learning centre that's opened in 2013. We've got 700 students in the main school and a further 90 in the ELC. We're located in the northern suburbs of Adelaide, the inner north, about 3 kilometres from the heart of the city. And although we're located in a comparatively high SES area, our student base is extremely diverse and our family profile is much broader than that of many of the non-government schools that are located in our geographical area. In terms of my office, we've been in existence in its current format since the beginning of 2018, and we've got responsibility for marketing and comms, enrolments, old scholars and community relations, fundraising, and our international students program. We've got a staff of 6 with myself as director, and we've got support officers that cover each of those 5 functions of our office. As a mid-range fee school in the Adelaide context, I'm greatly appreciative to our board and administration for resourcing us the way we are. I think we're in a great position in that front compared to talking to many of our schools, both in Adelaide but across the country. And the integrated approach to the development or the advancement role that we've got, I am very grateful to our administration for taking that punt a few years ago. So I want to focus on 4 areas that our teams dealt with this year that I think are contributing most significantly to the way that we're thinking of going forward in our practices in the development office and creating this new normal. So firstly, we'll have a look at the communications processes, then how we're adopting new levels of flexibility in the way we work, embracing the ideas of pivoting our strategies that I think are going to foster a newfound agility in our marketing, and leveraging our suppliers to assist in that. And then the license that I think the first 6 months of 2020 has given us to be innovative in the way we go forward. So let's start with smarter comms. And what's happened in our office this year is we've developed a little bit of a mantra. Now, when I was a student at Blackfriars, I still studied Latin. I don't know how many others are out there who did the same in their schools. But Festina Lente is the mantra that we've adopted this year. Doing a bit of research on where this saying came from back in AD 121, Suetonius, the Roman historian who wrote the 12 Caesars, spoke about Emperor Augustus deploring rashness in his military commanders. And this was one of his favourite adages. And it's about hastening slowly. It translates as make haste slowly, or more haste, less speed. And the meaning of that is it's all about performing your activities with a proper balance of urgency and diligence. If tasks are rushed too quickly, then mistakes are made and good long-term results are not achieved. Work's best done in a state of flow, in which one's fully engaged by the task and there's no sense of time passing. So it actually made sense for us in the early days of the COVID crisis that this was going to be something that we were going to adopt in our office. For us, the proverbial hit the fan just before Australia Day. So we talk about what happened in March. For us, the first glimpse of this being an issue for us happened on the Friday before the Australia Day weekend, so the 24th of January. I'd actually left school at about 2 in the afternoon. I was making my way down to the southern suburbs of Adelaide. We were going to have a couple of days off on the long weekend in Victor Harbour. And my principal was monitoring very closely through his network of principals in the eastern states in particular about the situation that was going to hit with international students who were about to make their way back into Australia. It was phone calls in the car on this 1 hour, 1.5 hour drive down south to talk about we needed to get some messaging out there, so that our students who were already in China who were looking to come back understood what was going on, but also to assure our current families, knowing full well that we have Chinese students in particular at school as part of our international cohort, to assure them that we were going to be taking the right steps to protect their children who were going to be returning back to school the following week. So this is the statement, well, basically it's verbatim what you see on there, that Channel 7 News picked up and put on air on Friday evening as I was about to start my holidays, talking about us. And there was a handful of other schools involved in this as well. And basically what was being done at that time was we were being accused of overreacting. It was a bit of scaremongering in their opinion. And that was how the story played out that evening and then over the course of the next few days. Interestingly enough, it made it it was on the project on the Monday night about the numbers of schools around Australia that were being seen as overreacting to this at that particular time. We chose not to take any of these statements down off our website, off our social media posts. We went with it, and that was based on, firstly, the information that was being shared through the principals network, and again, particularly out of the eastern seaboard, but also the feedback that we'd seen on social media over that first weekend from our families, and that they weren't worried. They didn't think we were overreacting. They were appreciative of the care and concern that we were appearing to be showing by getting this information out there. Conversely, there was one large school in Adelaide that on Wednesday morning did a complete backflip and decided that it was going to change all of these conditions that they'd come out with only 3 or 4 days before and open up the school and say, no, everyone's welcome. We don't care if you've been to China, you can come back in. Now, of course, by the end of that week, hindsight shows us that we'd gone from 7 days to 10 days to 14 days in quarantine for all people who were returning to Australia, particularly from China. So in the course of 1 week, we'd gone from being accused of overreacting to being ahead of the game. So that idea of not rushing to change our position based on the feedback we were getting from reliable sources and the audience feedback we'd been receiving had really prompted us to not react in that quick fire manner. So hastening slowly in that first week was paying dividends for us. And then, as I said, that became a bit of a mantra for the office. So next, as we entered COVID phase 2 during February, when all of the information was really gathering momentum, for us, it really came to a climax in mid-March. We had our large autumn fair scheduled for Sunday, the 15th of March. So Friday, the 13th of March, that was the day that it really came to a head for us. And our exec team was locked in a meeting for the best part of that day to make some pretty big calls on what we were going to do regarding a fair that had the capacity, had the potential to have 3,000 people on campus on Sunday afternoon in March. We ultimately cancelled that. We had great feedback from our exhibitors who were already booked in and our stall holders who were booked in. They understood that. Doesn't mean I didn't feel sick to my stomach having to make that call on that day, those calls on that day. Funnily enough, by the end of the day on the 13th of March, that was the day that our Prime Minister had come out and said, as of Monday, no gatherings of 500 or more people. So we felt vindicated by the end of the day, but it was a pretty tough call to make on that day. The experience of that particular day on the 13th, when we'd been in, effectively our exec team had been in lockdown, prompted us to instigate a twice-a-day meeting schedule starting on that following Monday morning. So what we did is we would meet every morning at 8:30, and then we'd reconvene again at about 3:30 in the afternoon as an exec team to gather all the information that had come to pass through the various sources, whether it was the Catholic Education Office here in Adelaide, whether it was news sources, to actually start to come together to clarify any messaging that we were going to put out. One of the things that we had observed in the first few weeks of the wave of information hitting a bit of a crescendo was there are a number of organisations, and schools included, I suppose, who were going out with messages and then having to retract or clarify based on the news cycle of that particular day. So one of the things that our exec team decided to do was we were going to hasten slowly, we were going to meet twice a day, come up with a consolidated message, and then we'll talk in a moment about how we chose to disseminate that messaging. It became pretty obvious to us early on that for our constituents, we basically, our schools became mini government agencies, information agencies for our families, because let's face it, our kids are our most important people in our lives. So the first people we wanted to make sure who were going to be safe were going to be our children. So where were they going to be going for information that was going to be most pertinent to them? And that was going to be the schools. So we needed to make sure that whatever information it was that we were disseminating was going to be clear, concise, and accurate. So we wanted to make sure that the twice-a-day meetings that we were having were generating clear, concise messaging. We also wanted to make sure that we were consolidating this information in one easy-to-find location for our families as well. So in early March, on the Monday following the fair, we launched what we call our COVID-19 Info Hub, which is a page on our website that's dedicated only to the current information from our school for our families to deal with getting through COVID-19. To promote that, we launched a pop-up ribbon on the front page of our website. By this time, Catholic Education South Australia had done a similar thing. So that ribbon that sits at the top of our website and is still there has direct links to our Info Hub, but also to the Catholic Education SA Info Hub. And that was rolled out across a broad range of Catholic schools through a common web provider in the days around that middle of March. So we now maintain that page. There's a bit of a snapshot of what it looks like. It's done as an FAQs page, and that big red box at the top shows our families when it was last updated. We did some wholesale updates to that page yesterday. If there's old information on that page, we take it down. So only the latest information is available. So if, in the early days, if it was moving from 7 days to 14 days in quarantine, 7 days disappeared. It was only 14 that was available on there. The most important thing that we've got in there at the moment, I think, for families is this little reference to event cancellations. That's now been updated to cancellations and postponements. We've got 30 events that have been cancelled over the course of the year so far and 10 postponements. They all sit there. Importantly, we also made sure that we used a mix of documents and videos and links and podcasts on this document as well. The twice-a-day meeting schedule netted an approach that we basically said day one would be a printed piece of communication, day two, a video. And I liked what Maureen said earlier on in the presentation about her coming across as being that calm voice for her community. So we wanted to make sure that that was interspersed with our messaging. We had comprehensive documents, but we also had videos from our principal presenting that calm front as well. We also had all of this messaging that sits on the COVID-19 Info Hub is supported by the use of our learner management system, sector, and our SMS and email systems as well. Always directing people back to the Info Hub as their primary source of information from our school as to where they get their COVID-19 information. We also produced a version of this in Vietnamese. And then anytime we did a printed piece of communication, and even as recently as yesterday, we put a printed piece of communication out, we translated into Vietnamese and to Persian for our Farsi community as well. They were the two largest ethnic groups in our school constituency. Sometimes when those letters were big, 2 to 3 pages in some cases to get a lot of information across, we didn't have time to bring in a translator, so we would default to Microsoft Translate or Google Translate with a rider at the front of those that said we've used this technology to translate this information. If we're trying to get information out in that timely fashion, we might not have time to translate a 3-page or a 2-page letter to get out to our families at the same time. So we made no apologies for using those translation services where necessary. So the COVID-19 Info Hub was all about efficiency, and then using the backup resources of sector and SMS were all about making sure that we were getting cut through to our constituents. So making haste slowly, but choosing your channels for efficiency, for cut through, and obviously language translations for maximum accessibility. If you're in a small office or you're confronted with a wave of communications that need to go out there, finding an efficient way to do this is obviously critical. And that's why we went for that one page where we could continually direct people back to, and are continuing to do that right now ourselves. Even if you can't manage that page yourself, in our situation, we had the resources of Catholic Education SA producing their one-stop shop as well, and we included that link in our ribbon. So depending on what situation your school, your institution is in, whether it's you maintaining a single source of information or directing people to a third party one that you're going to rely on, that's a critical thing for you to do ahead. At the end of the term, in term 1, I remember speaking to our head of primary school about the intensity that we'd faced in those weeks in the run-up to the end of term. But also, I think what came out of it was a sense of exhilaration out of it all, and the way that we, as an exec team, had clicked together to follow a process, and it became quite a rewarding experience to look back and reflect on what those weeks had been like. And go forward with some confidence that we thought we'd found a channel through which was going to be effective for our constituents, and hence we've maintained that moving into term 2. So next I'm going to talk about flexibility, and I think everyone who works in marketing communications, everyone who's on this podcast in this webinar today is going to be answering exactly the same way to this question. Of course, we've had to be flexible in 2020. I think the majority of our plans and strategies all went out the window about 30 seconds after our budgets did way back in March, because our budgets were also going to come under pressure as well. I think the key for us now is if we've adopted a flexible position, it's about staying there. And that's the new normal for us. I think adopting flexibility as our new normal is key. We've talked a lot about tours, and I want to use the way we've handled our tours to demonstrate how we think we've adopted flexibility this year and how that's going to shape us going forward. I know there's been a few questions popping up in the chat about, do we maintain virtual tours going forward? And I think adopting flexible approaches to tours is all about meeting families where they are and about what's convenient for them. So I think there's going to be a whole mix of tours going forward as a result of this. Our tours traditionally are on the first Thursday of every month, and they're led by our principal. And we did get away with doing our tour on the 5th of March, but then had to move into flexible mode. So we came up with a number of different tour strategies. What we've termed our virtual tours are a series of static videos that we filmed during the last week of term 1 last term. And we've cut them in various ways to show off the primary school, the middle school, the senior school, and our co-curricular programs. I'm going to get to pivot marketing a little bit later on, but the footage that we've captured in that week, we're going to be able to use for this year, for next year, to develop all sorts of marketing videos and strategies going forward as well. So they were our virtual tours, and they sit on our website in our visit page. We also ran a live online tour. We did invest a bit of money in doing this. It was a bit of a hybrid model from the Zoom meetings, and we used Inquiry Tracker to take registrations for this, but we employed a live streaming team to come in. It was actually the team that was live streaming masses from our cathedral here in Adelaide, who are doing that on a daily basis. We brought them in, and they set up a little studio in our front room of our main building. We had our Year 11 Media Studies class come in and work with them, and we had a camera go out live with our principal doing a walk of the school. People had registered to attend that, and exactly the same way that they would register to attend a normal principal's tour, they were sent a link to attend the live stream. So we had their details, we had a chat box set up. So throughout the tour, our principal was out walking the school with the camera crew. I was in our studio taking questions. We were then feeding those questions out to the principal on his tour so he could respond in real time back to the audience that was watching on. We had 18 families on that tour, live online. If we were running a principal's tour on a regular Monday during the year, we might have between 10 and 12 families on that day. So we had no net loss in the number of people who attended that tour in the early days of April. That's actually going to form a bit of a keystone for the way we do our international marketing. We obviously can't get on a plane at the moment and get overseas to talk to families about enrolling for our international program in the next few years. We're running our next live online tour tomorrow using a very similar format. Someone asked earlier on about how many people for a tour. I'm told that it's not exactly the same format we're using tomorrow. It's because the bulk of the audience is China. We're using the crew that's coming in is a Chinese-based crew. Apparently, we're talking to 17,000 people tomorrow in China using our live online tour. So the live online tour will be something that remains part of our mix going forward. Now that the restrictions are being lifted and we're starting to move into personal tours, we know that we've got a backlog of people who want to come to the school. So what we're doing is we're getting more tour guides mobilised. I know in the data that Brad was showing earlier on, he talked about we showed the importance of the classroom teachers as being a key assistant in getting people across the line when it comes to making that enrolment decision. We're going to be using classroom teachers and subject experts as our tour guides to relieve the backlog of personal tours. But based on the interest that the families have shown in what it is that they're looking for at Blackfriars. So our personal tours are going to be something that ramp up over the course of the next few months, as well as our generic principals tours that are coming back on stream as of the first week in July. So the new normal is new levels of personal service as part of our tours. What we're doing right now, it's a new level of flexibility. It's newfound efficiencies that we're finding to engage in professional learning. Adelaide's the 20-minute city, apparently. It takes us 20 minutes to get around the place. But all of a sudden, I don't need to get in my car and drive for 20 minutes to get to a meeting that I'm going to spend 30 minutes in and then spend 20 minutes in the car on the way back again. I've turned a 30-minute meeting into a 1-hour meeting. We can do that from home now. We've all experienced that over the course of the last couple of months. And our principals and our school leaders are embracing this. They understand this now as well. I'm at home today. I'm not in my office today as part of this. And that's it's going to be a legacy of the newfound flexibility that we're finding to come out of this. In lieu of assemblies, we moved to podcasts. We moved to student-driven social media, sanctioned by the school. We saw some of the stuff that Susie's been doing this year at Salesians in terms of getting students to generate the social media content. Our Hounds at Home initiative, Blackfriars, our mascot is the hound. So our Hounds at Home initiative was something that our students contributed to, particularly during the lockdown period, where they were filling us in on what it was that they were doing at home. Our student leaders were only too eager to jump on board our video platforms and talk about reinforcing messages, like how they were getting through the lockdown period. So all of these things have become the new normal for us. And we're not shelving any of this stuff. We're going forward with it. Our fortnightly podcasts now, which is called Hounds in Lockdown, it's become so much more than an assembly. We've now got our student wellbeing team interviewing teachers, interviewing students, the stuff that you wouldn't dare do in front of the assembly. But our teachers are only too happy to jump behind a microphone and talk a little bit more about themselves and share that with our families. Now, those podcasts are not only going to be shared amongst our own families, but they sit on our social media platforms now as well. So they've become important marketing tools for the school as well. None of this is going to shut down.
If I could just jump in, Pat, we're at 3:10. We've only got 5 minutes to go. If people could stay on for another 10 minutes or so, folks, we'll have a short Q&A and a bit of a wrap up. There's a few promises to come. So I know we've still got a full complement here, Pat, but if we could just sort of start to move to close, that'd be great. Thanks. Super.
Mate, no worries. I've only got 3 slides to go. So when I grew up, pivoting was all about, I was a basketballer. It was all about, that was the only pivot that I knew about. And this year I've learned about pivot marketing. I'd encourage you all to work with your suppliers and stakeholders about, if you've got stuff locked in, how can you change that? How can you convert print advertising into digital? How can you use your digital advertising differently moving forward? What have you done to look at changing the way your events run? We've cancelled reunions this year. We've already looked to combine those next year. So instead of a class of 2000 reunion this year, next year will be a combined class of 2000 with 2001 reunion for next year. Our concerts are moving online. We talked about our tours. We're having a watch party for our annual music concert in a couple of weeks' time as well, because we can't gather in a big concert hall like we used to. So consider how you're going to pivot your initiatives at school moving into 2021, because there is no better time to think outside the square. If that's the silver lining that comes out of COVID-19, it's about the license that we've now been given to innovate. Our communities are going to forgive us if we've tried something that hasn't quite come off, because they're unusual times. We keep hearing about unprecedented times. Our constituents are giving us a license to experiment. There's an appetite out there for new ideas. Too much school marketing, too much marketing in general becomes copycat in its very nature. This is the time that we can actually have license to get creative, to experiment, to try something new. I'm as guilty as the next person of doing the same sort of marketing that I've done year in, year out. Let's try something new this year. We've got license to do it. So I think that's the big silver lining to come out of COVID-19. So my 4 tips from this experience: hasten slowly. Have a think about how you're going to do your communications and find the effective, efficient channels for your audience. If you've adopted flexibility this year, stay that way moving forward. Work with your suppliers, work with your audience to pivot how you're doing your marketing, and keep on innovating. Just because we've done it in 2000 in this crisis doesn't mean that we should stop doing that in the second half of this year and into 2021 and beyond.
Thank you, Pat. And I'm going to ask everyone if they could stay on for 10 minutes. We're going to do a 5-minute Q&A and then a 5-minute wrap. And I'm going to ask the first question to the panel. Is the new normal? Do we stop doing these virtual tours? What's more important, Maureen, Susie, Patrick, Anthony, Brad? Is it virtual tours, open days, private one-on-one tours? What's the new normal, folks? Jump in and tell me what's the new normal.
There is no one correct answer.
All of the above to a certain extent.
Yeah, nothing. Just like, radio didn't replace newspaper, TV didn't replace radio, and so on and so on. This is going to be an addition to the suite of tools that you need in your toolbox, not an either-or.
I wholeheartedly agree. Anthony, I'm sure you'd concur with that.
Yeah, I think it's a valuable tool. I just think it's how schools choose to use it. I think it's you meeting the families where they want to be met. And sometimes, as Patrick was pointing out, you've got audiences that are, thousands of miles away for international students who are coming out. It's something else to certainly consider, because you can broaden your reach now. But if you have that mindset, think about how you might do things differently now. That's something, that would be my advice.
And I would be reluctant to just say we went from this mode to this mode, or tick that box, because it's then what's next? What's the next way? How else do we connect? And that's never going to change now. So continue.
I like that. I'm just going to bring in Cameron Bailey here. Cameron is a digital marketing expert with Catholic Schools Guide. And as we all know, Catholic Schools Guide has a print solution and a digital solution. Cameron, just talk to us about the kind of mix that you would like to see that schools adopting that pivot point between print and digital from your perspective, your thoughts, just a few thoughts around that, please, Cameron.
Mute. He's on, I think, Cameron.
Oh, is Cameron gone, is he?
No, his mute's on.
Oh, Cameron, your mute's on, sorry.
Sorry, I should have known that. I'm the digital marketing guy. I should have been good on that. So first of all, I consult with a number of businesses and some in the education sector. So I am acutely aware of some of the issues you've got here. One of the things I'd like to encourage you to think about is the concept of Google Ads. A lot of people think of Google Ads and they think of Google, they think of the search campaigns where you do a search. Now, my experience in education, particularly in the school sector, you tend to be pretty good at appearing for your own search names, and people looking Catholic schools near me, schools tend to have that covered. In fact, Catholic Schools Guide has that covered very, very effectively with over, I think it's 3.5 million searches last year where your schools appeared in, our results appeared in your search. When people were searching for your school, our website appeared. So that's a great thing. But one of the areas that people don't know about with Google is this concept called Google Display. Now, Google Display is the ads that you see all over the web. So all over the web, you can see ads. The Age in Melbourne, Herald Sun, Courier Mail, all of those have ads. And all of those are areas that you can use to promote your brand and very effectively promote your brand, because you can show the pictures and all these great images, the logos that everyone knows about you, that all of the stuff that is your brand collateral, your image brand collateral, that you can't do in a little search ad, a little text search ad. You can't do that. So display advertising is something that I would seriously consider all schools should look at. And the reason you should look at also is it is one of the most undervalued advertising asset in the market today. Probably the most undervalued asset is actually YouTube pre-rolled advertising, and I'd also encourage you to look at that. But I'm going to talk a little bit about a display offering that we have at Catholic Schools Guide at the moment. It's a audience remarketing tool. What we allow you to do is that you all have an ideal demographic that you're targeting. I would imagine that demographic would be a parent. You would hope that they're of a certain age, not a parent that's a grandparent. You'd be hoping they're of a certain age. And you'd be hoping, if we're going to be really, really rude right now, you'd be hoping that they're of a certain wealth category or wealth bracket that would enable them to be able to afford to send their children to a school. Now, can I just give you some stats from a recent campaign? And I'm sorry, Greg, I've only just found these stats, and these are going to be new to you as much as they're new to everyone else here. The audience,
I hope they're good.
You're going to love them. I hope you are. The audience of Catholic Schools Guide, let me just tell you what the audience of Catholic Schools Guide is. 94% of them are parents. Only 6% of them state that they're not parents. Now, I think that's a pretty good area to target. The age profile of those parents, because let's face it, Greg's a parent, Anthony's a parent, but they both acknowledge that they're parents of kids who finished the schooling process. And I've met Greg's kids, and they've definitely finished the schooling process. So being a parent's not necessarily good. What about if I told you that 36% of them sit between the age range of 35 to 44, and the next highest is 25 to 34. Very, very small segment in the above 65, and then there's 22% between 45 and 54. I can give you these numbers later on, but ultimately what you're looking at there is over 50% of them are between the ages of 25 and 44. I would think that would pretty much cover most of your market. There might be, and then the next one is the next highest bracket. But I think this one's also interesting, and that is that of the people who visit the Catholic Schools Guide, the 20% of them are in the top 10 percentile of Australians for income. Is that, Greg, does that, I can only talk to Greg, so this is information I've only just revealed to Greg now. So 20% of Catholic School Guide visitors are in the top 10% of income. If we're to include from the top 20% of income, that would raise to 37% of Catholic Schools Guide visitors. So you're looking at parents, you're looking at in the right age range, and you're looking at people who possibly have the ability to send their children to a school.
That's a great plug, and thank you. That was not scripted, and so thank you very much, Cameron, for those. I've just got a question from the audience here to people running virtual school tours. Susie Patrick, your thoughts on, obviously someone from outside your school can register for a school tour, so even a competitor potentially. Any views or thoughts about that, Susie?
Yeah, I do. We have this specific example when we first started doing tours. And my answer to that was actually approach the school that you see as an ideal and then ask specific questions around what you actually need rather than hooking in to the event itself. There's going to be a lot of stuff that you don't need to know about. It's going to be quite a lengthy tour probably. It's going to be, and you'll be a lot more targeted in figuring out what it is you exactly want practical answers on that I think can be really useful. So pick the school or a school that you see doing it well, reach out to them and if you want that to be me, I'm more than happy. You feel free to reach out and we can help you. We've done it with some other schools.
And I courteous if people are, many of our schools have connected with people like Susie, Patrick and others to say, hey, do you mind if I drop in on a virtual tour? Absolutely fine. This sector is really collegiate. I always let people know that you're doing it rather than trying to be a secret shopper. It's just be honest and transparent about it. Now just any other questions? I ask people to type in their questions before we wrap. We've got a couple more minutes. We've got still a big audience out there at the moment. Any other comments? I'll just see if there's any questions coming in here. Please fire a question away if you've got it on the chat. Any other closing thoughts from you, Maureen? And I'll let the panelists each give a closing thought before we give our wonderful offers that we're going to let people hear about. Any thoughts, closing conclusion remarks, Maureen?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Greg. I think there was a link that went through many of the presentations around the importance of brand. And if we go back to Brad's presentation around what you promise and how you deliver that, and in Anthony's about that relationships are key to marketing, and you might resonate with the tagline, and that links it back to your brand. So a key question, I suppose, is would your students, your teachers, your parents articulate your brand promise as the way that you do?
Nice.
And if yes, why? So what has been success in that synergy? If not, why not? Remembering two things that have come up today, that students are great ambassadors, and so if they've got a brand identity, a brand view that is not yours, that's a worry. And parents are a great word of mouth. And so, as Anthony said, you feed that word of mouth. So do a little bit of testing around, do you all have the same sense of what your brand is?
I like that. I like that. Student ambassadors, parent ambassadors, and future. I know one of Anthony's big lines is turn future families into raving fans before they get there. Patrick, any concluding remarks before I go to Brad after you?
I love these sorts of opportunities because I think I take more out of them than I certainly put into them. The notes I've taken from our presenters today have been fabulous. There's a heap of slides there from Brad. Guiding principle number 4, focusing on existing families. I'm going to slip that into every board report I submit, I reckon, from now on. Just fantastic. I mean, that internal marketing is so important, and I think we lose sight of that too easily in our marketing activities. So look, that's one of my massive takeaways out of today. Look, keep innovating, everyone. We've got license to do it. Just keep doing it. That's my big message from today's presentation. I think that's the silver line that comes out of this. We've all had to think differently. So why haven't we been doing it up till now? We've given the opportunity to do it. Let's just keep pushing forward by doing that again.
Thank you, Pat. Well spoken. Brad, your closing thought?
Just quickly picking up a little bit on Patrick there. Absolutely agree. We've been given the license to do it. Most school marketers spend their career going, let me try new things, let me do things differently. It's handed to you on a plate. You've got it.
Never before.
Now's the time. But don't try and do the same. Don't look at somebody else. And this is echoing back to Susie's comments about the tours. Don't look at somebody else and say, I'll do that, because that's not you. If you're trying to be somebody else, that's not genuine, that's not authentic, and your prospective parents and your parents will see through that in a heartbeat. So take the big picture guiding principles, incorporate them, work them through, do the hard thinking, and come up with an authentic brand that is yours and represents you, and implement that.
And speaking of which, Brad and his team produce a beautiful journal that comes out every quarter called School Marketing Journal. And for a nice giveaway, thanks to Brad and the team, every single participant here is going to get a copy of that. So thank you. I'll liaise with Brad about how that happens. And Brad, on behalf of Catholic Schools Guide, thank you so much for that great offer.
Pleasure.
Thanks, mate. I think, Susie, your closing comments before I hand to Anthony.
No worries. Yeah, so a couple of things that I've picked up along the road today that I think are 4 really important things. The first one, Maureen, you touched on the why, and that how factor. And I think that's really important in demonstrating that to your audience. The second thing is let the insights drive your next move. I think that's absolutely crucial. A lot of these departments are not hugely resourced, so we also need to understand where the energy is best next put. The third point is broadening the reach. Anthony, touching on what you were saying, and acknowledging this change in behaviour from the audience. It is a real thing, it's not made up, and we need to respond to that appropriately. And the last one would be really embracing what we've been talking about in classroom for a really long time, and that's growth mindset.
Well done. Anthony, just, I know you're, I might just ask everyone to mute their mics, if they wouldn't mind. Anthony, I know you're the data is king, which segues a lot from what Brad and Maureen were talking about, and what Susie's just said, make informed decisions about data. Your closing thoughts and remarks about today.
Yeah, I think, well, Greg, thanks for putting it on. I think it's great. You've got a great panel, amazing content. I always pick up stuff myself, and I think, yeah, that's a great idea, you know. I'd like to see how we can incorporate some of those things in the stuff that we do at Inquiry Tracker. You know, I think the most important thing is you got to understand the data. You're wasting time if you don't. You've got to have the data, and you got to trust the data and not your gut, and you got to make smart decisions on that. That's number one. And number two is I've been a big advocate of not just your parent and student ambassadors, but getting them involved. And by that, I mean, when you do your tours, you do your surveys, but when you come back for like your current families, if you don't, I would highly recommend you start to look at your school like a business. And one of the biggest things you do to measure your business here, at least in the US, is a Net Promoter Score, an NPS study. And that is basically an answer to one question is, would you recommend our school to a friend or colleague on a scale of 0 to 10? And that's it. And that gets you your NPS score. And your goal should be to improve that score every year. And my last piece of advice is leverage your students and leverage your families. Get your students involved. Get them to do an audit of the facility and the reception and the grounds. Get them to come back and say, well, here's what we found. This is what we think you should do. Because guess what? Your parents are going to become raving fans because you put your students in positions of leadership. And that is another way of branding your school. It's very powerful. So, and I picked a lot of that stuff of what I'm hearing other speakers say today. So there you go.
Thank you. I'm just going to share my screen to give up the special offers. Well said, Anthony. Just going to bring up my screen here. Hopefully you can see that in a moment. I'll just bring that up. Finally, thank you to everyone. Thank you to our great sponsors. I gave them all a bit of a plug at the start. There they are again. Fantastic. Thank you so much for all of your efforts in supporting Catholic Schools Guide. That is the Catholic Schools Guide website, catholicschoolsguide.com.au. We proudly list every Catholic secondary school in Australia for free. And if you would like a special offer, that's a humble line listing. There's more to come. Wait, there's more. There are steak knives coming now. Here they come. Our theme for 2021 is Champions of Change. And that came before COVID, Maureen, so you'd be pleased to know that. And don't you love her offer, her face there. In terms of the offer for the schools in major metropolitan Melbourne, Sydney and Brisbane, you go into our print edition and our digital. And if you book prior, and I'm going to extend it to Friday the 3rd of July. It was running to the 30th of June. We're going to extend it to next Friday. If you're a Catholic school in those 3 cities, you will go from our base package to our top premium package at no charge with in excess of well over $1,000 of digital extras and other things. But there's even better. What happens if you are not in Melbourne, Sydney and Brisbane, which half the audience on this webinar are not, but they're in Catholic schools? You not only get a free line listing on our website, you're going to get a full featured page. So, you know, Patrick's School is in Blackfriars in South Australia. You're going to get a full featured page on our website for free for the rest of the year. So at no cost and with no tricks and or smoke and mirrors there. Just something that we can do to say thank you and give back. So book and book now because it's free for you. In terms of inquiry tracker, because I half own the business with Anthony, if you would like to use inquiry tracker software systems to capture your future families and turn those families into raving fans, we're going to give you a 50% reduction off the establishment fee, which is a $1,250 savings. If you don't ask you to sign up in the next 7 days, but if you formally request a presentation or request a proposal before Friday, the 3rd of July, you will be eligible to receive that 50% reduction if you decide to proceed with your bookings. And finally, here we go. This is professional development. You don't get speakers like this very often. So every one of you will receive a professional development certificate issued by Catholic Schools Guide. You are also going to get the beautiful school marketing journal from courtesy of Image 7. You will also get Master the Art of Growing and Managing Enrollments from Inquiry Tracker. And guess what? We're going to do it again. And guess what Brad and Maureen and Pat and Anthony and Susie all talked about today? Was mastering the word of mouth. We know, I know that Brad knows this stuff. The bigger schools and the smaller schools across Australia, you ask them, what's the number one? Oh, word of mouth. And there's a shrug of the shoulders that goes with it. Rubbish. We can influence and control, and what we do influences word of mouth. So it's up to us. So that is the next forum. Jot this down. Term 3, Thursday the 20th of August is our next forum. And obviously we're looking for presenters. We're looking for those talented individuals for a chance to shine. We might even reassemble some of this panel back. You never know. They're pretty impressive, aren't they? So hopefully you've enjoyed it. I'd love you all just to get on your chat message right now. You can all control your chat message to me. And I know there's nearly a full complement of people on board. Send us a chat message, click on that button and tell me, A, did you enjoy it? And B, hopefully you say nice things about our panelists. And B, if you are happy to book in for the next forum, we're going to get it together. Hopefully we've met the mark today. On behalf of Catholic Schools Guide, send us a message now on the chat. Thank you, everybody. Thanks to the panelists. You did a fantastic job. You've been brilliant. Thank you. Getting lots of chat messages starting to come through, guys, which is just an endorsement from what you've all done. So thank you so much. I'll stay on for a few minutes. We're here. Happy to chat for another couple of minutes, guys, but that formally ends our presentation. I'm going to stop recording and shut up and allow us to chat.